A senior in Atlanta opens her cabinet, pulls out a can of black-eyed peas and a leftover piece of smoked sausage, and has a full plate on the table before the evening news starts. No recipe book, no grocery run, just 10 minutes and loose change. Black seniors living alone have been cooking like this for generations, turning what most people would call an empty kitchen into a real meal every single night. A pot of neck bones and rice, sardines on toast with hot sauce, fried bologna with the side of canned corn. Some of these dinners go back to what their grandmothers made during hard times. Others were invented on a Tuesday with nothing but an onion, a little grease, and seasoning salt. If you have ever lived alone and fed yourself well on almost nothing, you already know exactly what this list sounds like. Stewed tomatoes and okra came together in one cast iron skillet in less time than it took to set the table. Fresh or canned tomatoes went in first with diced onion and a little bacon grease. Then sliced okra, cut thick, never thin, because thin sliced okra disintegrates and the elders knew the difference. Added in the last 8 minutes so it stayed toothsome and didn't turn to mush. Salt, pepper, and a pinch of cayenne. That was it. Served over white rice, this dish had West African ancestry that predated the American South by centuries. Okra arrived in the Americas through the transatlantic slave trade, carried by enslaved West Africans who understood it as a staple crop and a natural thickener, and it planted itself in Gula, Creole, and Deep South kitchens where it never left. She didn't need a reason to make it. The okra was in season. That was reason enough. Before the canned salmon and onions on toast was the meal she made on days she was tired. Not tired the way young people are tired. Tired the way a woman gets after 50 years of feeding everyone else. She would open the tall can, drain it, pick out the larger bones, and fry the fish with sliced white onion until the onion went soft and the salmon crisped at the edges. Laid over buttered toast, it was not a fancy plate. It was a 10-minute meal she made for herself, alone at the small table by the window where she ate quietly after the grandchildren had gone. Canned Alaskan salmon was an affordable household staple by the 1940s, available at every corner grocery and reliable in ways fresh fish often was not. After she was gone, her children found 3 cans in the cupboard above the stove. Nobody opened them for a long time. That is what a plain meal can carry. A whole person held in something as ordinary as a can on a kitchen shelf. Time equals 1 second / greater than in the weeks before the first frost, when fields were still giving. Nobody talked about this one at the family reunion, but everyone knew. Vienna sausages, straight from the tin, were the dinner that happened when dinner didn't happen. When the legs were tired, the stove felt too far, and the body just needed something before bed. The small can popped open with a pull tab, and the pale little sausages sat in their broth like something between a meal and an apology. Eaten cold with saltines and a squirt of yellow mustard, or picked up with fingers one at a time, this was a dinner measured in silence. It cost 35 cents in the 1970s. It required nothing, no cooking, no plates if you didn't want one, no effort beyond pulling the tab. For seniors living alone in small apartments after their families moved away, this was Tuesday night and Wednesday and sometimes Friday. Nobody judged it out loud because everyone had a can in the cabinet. The people who ate Vienna sausages for dinner weren't ashamed. They were tired, and tired is its own kind of hungry.
Pan-fried Spam with syrup was a meal that divided children into those who loved it and those who tolerated it. But everyone ate it because mothers made it, and food was never refused. The Spam was sliced thick, fried in its own fat until both sides developed a caramelized crust, then drizzled with syrup while still hot, so sweetness soaked into the salty meat. The combination tasted strange at first, but became oddly satisfying. with sugar balancing salt in a way that made sense to taste buds even if it confused the mind. This dish appeared frequently when Spam was cheap, shelf-stable, and required no refrigeration, making it ideal for households without reliable ice boxes or money for fresh meat. Black mothers fried Spam for breakfast before work, for dinner after long shifts, and for any meal in between when time and options were both limited. A can cost under 50 cents and provided protein for several meals.
Number 19, hominy and fatback grits, a low-country Sunday breakfast that ruled kitchens from Charleston to Savannah. A 10-quart pot on a propane burner in 1948 Charleston. 3 cups of dried hominy soaked overnight in lye water made from wood ash. Rinsed twice in the morning. The fatback was cured pork belly with the rind on. The cook sliced it thick with a butcher knife she had sharpened every Saturday for 30 years. She rendered it slow until the cracklings floated golden. The grease ran clear. She lifted the cracklings out with a slotted spoon, set them on brown paper for a sandwich the next day, stirred the hominy into the rendered fat for 40 minutes. The kernels burst soft and golden. Salt and black pepper were the only seasoning. The pot fed 9 for 20 cents. A field hand ate it for breakfast, walked 4 miles to the field, worked through to supper without complaint. The fatback rind went into a paper sack on the back porch, got fried up the next day on a wedge of cornbread. The dish was the working answer to a Lent that lasted past Easter. The hominy came from a Geechee mill that ground corn the same way the Gullah women had for centuries. The recipe moved from mother to daughter like a Bible verse. This was the kind of cooking nobody had a name for yet. It sat on every Sunday table you walked past from Charleston to Savannah. By 1962, the lye treatment was banned in commercial kitchens. Home cooks switched to canned hominy. The texture wasn't the same. The dish quietly disappeared. The recipe survived only in the heads of women born before 1948. Number 14, dirty rice. The name came from the way chopped chicken livers and gizzards speckled the white grains until the whole pot looked dirty. This was thrift cooking at its cleverest. The giblets that came tucked inside every chicken, the parts most kitchens discarded, were finely chopped and browned in a skillet with onion, celery, and bell pepper. That savory mixture got folded into cooked rice along with the pan drippings, staining the grains brown and loading them with deep, meaty flavor. A whole skillet of it cost almost nothing because the most expensive thing in it was the rice. It stretched a few cents of organ meat across a dish big enough to feed everyone, and it tasted far richer than its price. Working families across the South kept it in heavy rotation precisely because it turned scraps into something that ate like real meat, bold, savory, and proof that flavor never needed money. A full pot born from the parts other folks threw away. Number 21, neck bone and potato stew. Potatoes were the great stretcher. When the neck bones alone were not enough to fill the table, you cut up 4 or 5 russet potatoes and dropped them into the pot. They soaked up the broth and broke down at the edges, thickening everything into something closer to a stew than a soup. Families who had moved north to Chicago and Detroit during the Great Migration kept this meal alive in cramped apartment kitchens. The pot was smaller, but the method was the same. You browned the bones, covered them with water, seasoned them, and waited. The potatoes went in during the last hour. When they were soft enough to mash against the side of the pot with a wooden spoon, dinner was ready.
Black-eyed pea cakes offered a crisp, hearty meal with almost no effort, transforming yesterday's peas into golden patties in minutes. Cooked peas were mashed with a handful of cornmeal and a pinch of salt, then shaped into small cakes that hit hot oil with a satisfying hiss. The outside browned quickly into a crunchy crust while the inside stayed soft and earthy, full of quiet richness. Served plain with a dash of hot sauce, or alongside greens, these cakes filled plates and bellies without draining precious supplies. Families praised the recipe for its speed and thrift, turning a modest pot of beans into something that felt like a feast. Even children enjoyed the crisp edges and gentle flavor, proof that necessity could create its own kind of delicacy. Black-eyed pea cakes captured the essence of survival cooking: fast, frugal, and unexpectedly delicious. A reminder that with a little creativity, even the simplest leftovers could shine.
Number 20, sweet potato and syrup. Sweet potatoes were the cheapest vegetable in the 1950s South. A bushel cost less than $1 at roadside stands. Families who grew their own paid nothing. You baked them until the skin split and the flesh turned orange and soft, then split one open and poured cane syrup or sorghum molasses over the top. That was supper. A baked sweet potato with syrup cost less than 5 cents and filled a grown man enough to sleep through the night. In rural Alabama and Georgia, children ate this 3 or 4 nights a week during winter. The sweet potato was dessert and dinner in one. Grandmothers who kept a garden had bushels stored in the root cellar, and a jug of Alaga syrup lasted a month. Nobody called it a meal plan. Nobody wrote it down. But sweet potato and syrup kept more black families standing through lean months than almost anything else on this list.
Potato salad stretched with extra eggs and mayonnaise became the cold side dish that fed crowds for minimal cost, transforming basic potatoes into creamy satisfaction. Black mothers boiled potatoes by the 5-pound bag, timing them carefully so they'd be firm enough to dice without turning to mush, then combined them with hard-boiled eggs that provided protein. The ratio was crucial: enough eggs to make the salad filling, but not so many that it tasted only of eggs, with mayonnaise binding everything together. Mustard added tang, while finely diced celery and onions provided crunch and flavor dimension. The true economical genius came from using potatoes as filler, allowing a single dozen eggs to feed 20 people when stretched with enough starch. Some families added sweet pickle relish for both flavor and the satisfaction of having extras in their salad. The salad chilled overnight, making it perfect for gatherings where oven space was limited and make-ahead dishes were essential.
Potted meat sandwiches were a fixture of poor black childhoods, made from those small cans of spreadable mystery meat that cost only pennies. The potted meat was salty, finely ground, and suspiciously smooth, but spread on white bread with mustard or pickle relish. It became a meal that could feed several children from a single can. Nobody asked what was in potted meat because knowing might have made it impossible to eat. Mothers kept cans stacked in the pantry for emergencies, pulling them out when the refrigerator was empty and payday was still distant. The sandwiches were eaten at school from brown paper bags hidden from classmates who might have recognized poverty. Potted meat tasted like survival, salty and metallic. Children who ate these sandwiches remember them with gratitude and something like grief for the lean years.
Fried saubali with molasses was a dinner that blended savory and sweet in a way that still lingers in memory. Saubali, or pork belly, was inexpensive and high in fat, making it a common ingredient for working families. Sliced and fried crisp in a skillet, it was then drizzled with molasses, turning it into a dish that balanced salt, fat, and sweetness. Served with cornbread or potatoes, it made a plate that was both filling and deeply flavorful. Families loved it because it elevated a humble cut into something special, a small indulgence during hard years. The molasses gave the pork a sticky, caramelized coating that made the dish memorable for children and adults alike. Though it disappeared as leaner cuts became more common, fried saubelly with molasses once represented creativity and comfort. It proved that even the simplest, cheapest ingredients could create meals that felt indulgent and satisfying in every bite. This was not an everyday dinner. Buffalo meat was a rare and sacred thing, hunted with care and shared with reverence. When settlers got their hands on some, they treated it like a holiday. The roast was slow cooked over fire or buried in a pit with hot stones, and the juices were thickened into a gravy using wild juniper berries crushed with a rock or spoon. The result was smoky, slightly bitter, and rich beyond measure. Juniper gave it that wild taste, something sharp, something old. This dish came from a time when nothing was farmed and everything was earned. It fed big families, whole camps, or traveling parties headed west. Nobody wasted a bite, and nobody ever forgot the taste. Vegetable soup from kitchen scraps was pure genius born from necessity, a pot of everything and nothing all at once. Every peel, every end, every leftover carrot, potato, or onion found its way into the bubbling broth. Grandparents saved the bones from roasts, the wilted greens from salads, even a handful of noodles if there were some left behind. Those scraps met in the pot and became something far greater than the sum of their parts. The broth deepened in color and flavor with every passing hour, carrying the scent of care through the house. It was food that took time, that demanded patience, that rewarded frugality with comfort. The wooden spoon stirred slowly, pulling stories from the pot like memories rising with the steam. Kids waited, bowls in hand, as the kitchen fogged with warmth. Each bite tasted like love stretched thin but never broken. Nothing was wasted, not time, not flavor, not effort. It was a reminder that even small things, when treated with respect, could become something beautiful. Vegetable soup was a testament to endurance, to gratitude, and to the art of making enough out of almost nothing. Turkey necks and gravy were the kind of meal that started from scraps and ended like a feast. Bought cheap at the butcher, these bony cuts looked like nothing special, but a few hours in a pot proved otherwise. The meat fell from the bone, tender and rich, and the broth turned silky with flavor. A roux turned it into thick gravy poured over rice or mashed potatoes, stretching the meal to fill every plate. The scent of it cooking could make a house feel alive again. This was not just dinner, it was survival served with soul. The lesson was simple. With time and patience, even the cheapest meat could turn into a meal worth remembering. The bubbling pot filled the air with warmth, calling everyone home before the sun went down. Kids would peek in the kitchen, eyes wide, waiting for the first ladleful. When the meal was finally served, it felt like Sunday dinner, even if it was a Tuesday night. Every bite was tender, heavy with flavor, and lighter on the wallet than anyone could believe. It was proof that comfort did not need wealth. It only needed care.
Lima bean and smoked meat stew was the supper that smelled like it had been cooking since morning, even when she hadn't started it until 5. A smoked neck bone or a single ham hock piece dropped into a pot of canned lima beans. She kept 6 cans in the pantry at all times because life was uncertain. With diced onion, a bay leaf, and enough water to cover, then brought to a boil and simmered hard for 20 minutes while the smoke from the bone dissolved into the broth. The beans went creamy without being broken, thick without being pasty, and the pot liquor left behind was something you didn't pour down the drain. You sopped it with bread. You crumbled cornbread into it. Lima beans had their own deep history in Black kitchens. Introduced to the Americas through indigenous and African agricultural exchange, they were a pantry staple long before the Great Migration carried them north into Chicago and Detroit apartments where a single can could anchor a whole meal. Salmon croquettes were church ladies' proof that nothing needed to be fancy to be magnificent, just seasoned right and cooked in a cast iron skillet. You drained the can, mixed the fish with crushed crackers, a beaten egg, diced onion, and black pepper, shaped the patties by a feel, and laid them into hot oil. By the 1940s, canned salmon was a reliable pantry staple in Black households across the South and North alike. The trick, and nobody told you this directly, was using your hands to judge when the mix was tight enough to hold in the pan. Too wet and they fell apart. too dry and they tasted like cardboard. That judgment came from standing close enough to watch her do it. You either had it or you spent years getting it wrong. Tomato sandwiches with mayonnaise only appeared when the garden came in. That short window in July and August when the tomatoes were heavy, warm from the vine, and red all the way through. This was never a winter meal. The tomato had to be sliced thick, almost a quarter inch, laid on soft white bread, spread with Duke's mayonnaise. Always Duke's in the South, where brand loyalty ran deeper than politics. Salt and black pepper on top, nothing else. The bread soaked through from the juice within seconds, and you ate it fast, leaning over the plate so it didn't drip down your wrist. For seniors who still kept a small garden or had a neighbor who brought tomatoes by, this sandwich was the taste of summer itself. No cooking, no heat from the stove, and a sweetness from the fruit that made the meal feel like a gift. Once the season passed, it was gone, and waiting for it to come back was part of what made it matter.
Fried cornmeal mush turned yesterday's breakfast into tonight's supper, using leftover porridge that had been poured into a pan and chilled until firm. Black mothers would slice the cold mush into rectangles, then fry them in bacon grease until both sides developed a golden crust that crackled when bitten. The outside became crispy, while the inside stayed soft and creamy, creating texture contrast that made simple cornmeal feel special. These fried slices could be eaten with syrup for sweetness or gravy for savory satisfaction. This dish appeared regularly on 1960s tables where nothing went to waste, and yesterday's leftovers became dinner without apology. Children fought over corner pieces with the most crust, while adults appreciated how far a pot of cornmeal could stretch when used twice. Fried cornmeal mush proved Black mothers could turn plain ingredients into meals worth remembering using nothing but skill and the creativity poverty demanded.
Number 22, pig feet jelly with hot vinegar. A glass mason jar on the back porch shelf in 1945 Charleston, packed with split pig feet, water, salt, bay leaf, and 3 cloves of garlic. She simmered the feet for 6 hours. The meat fell off. The broth turned the color of weak tea. She strained it, pressed the meat into the jar, let the natural collagen do the work. By morning, the whole thing had set into a pale amber jelly. She sliced it cold for supper, served it with hot pepper vinegar in a thin saucer, a stack of saltine crackers on the side. A man came in from the field, ate half the jar, asked for more. The dish needed no icebox in winter. Your grandmother could feed a working man on what the white grocer threw away. That was the genius of her Depression kitchen. You wouldn't think a foot could become supper, but it could. Number 11, chitterlings. No dish carried more history or more labor than a pot of cleaned hog intestines on the stove. Back in slavery times, when the hog was killed, the enslaver kept the hams and the chops, and the intestines were among the parts passed down to the quarters. The people who received them brought West African knowledge with them, where no part of an animal was ever wasted, and they made something nourishing out of what was meant as refuse. The work was punishing. Each length of intestine had to be turned inside out and scraped clean by hand, rinsed again and again until it was spotless, a job that could take the better part of a day. Then they simmered for hours with onion, garlic, and a splash of vinegar, the smell filling the whole house. By the holidays, chitlins meant family. The women gathered around the sink, cleaning together, talking and laughing through the chore. Served with hot sauce and a side of greens, they fed a crowd on the cheapest part of the pig, a dish born of survival that became a tradition worth gathering for. Number 16, neck bones and black-eyed peas. Black-eyed peas carry more superstition than any other bean in the southern pantry. Eating them on New Year's Day was supposed to bring luck for the rest of the year, and most families took that seriously enough to make sure the pot was full by noon on January 1st. But black-eyed peas with neck bones was not a once-a-year occasion. It showed up whenever the dried peas were on hand and the budget was thin, which was most weeks. The peas cooked faster than pintos or limas, breaking down in about an hour into a thick, starchy pot that clung to the rice underneath. The neck bones gave them a depth that salt alone could never reach. Families in Georgia and the Carolinas grew black-eyed peas in the garden between the corn rows because the plants fixed nitrogen in the soil and helped the corn grow taller. The food fed the family and the garden fed itself. That was the kind of efficiency that did not come from a textbook. It came from people who had been watching dirt and weather for generations.
Peanut stew with rice was a bold, nourishing dish born from West African traditions and adapted to the speed of a 10-minute meal. Leftover rice from yesterday's supper warmed quickly, while a handful of peanuts was ground into a paste and thinned with hot water to create a creamy sauce. Onions and garlic sautéed in a little fat gave the stew a savory backbone as the peanut mixture bubbled into a fragrant gravy. If there was a scrap of smoked meat or a pinch of chili pepper, it found its way into the pot. But even without extras, the flavor was deep and rich. When poured over hot rice, the stew coated every grain, providing protein and comfort in each bite. Families cherish this recipe for its speed and its tie to ancestral flavors, a taste of heritage that fit neatly into a hurried morning or a weary evening. In the toughest days, it proved that tradition and survival could share the same bowl.
Number 8, oxtail soup. The butcher sold oxtails for almost nothing because white customers did not want them. A pound cost 15 to 20 cents in the early 1950s. Black families knew what to do with them. You browned the oxtails in a heavy pot, added water, onions, carrots, potatoes, and whatever the garden provided, then simmered for 3 to 4 hours until the meat fell off the bone and the broth turned rich with collagen. The gelatin from the bones made the soup thick without flour or cream. When it cooled, it set like jelly. That was how you knew it was good. A single pot fed a family for 3 days. The bones gave up every trace of flavor they had. Nothing was left behind. In Black communities across the South, oxtail was not a cheap cut. It was a butcher's mistake and a grandmother's
Fried chicken wings bought in bulk became the affordable alternative to whole birds, giving families the crispy, golden poultry that made Thanksgiving feel festive without emptying wallets. Chicken wings sold for 30 cents per pound in the 1970s, making them one of the most economical cuts available, especially when purchased in 10-pound bags from discount grocers. Black mothers would season them overnight with paprika, garlic powder, onion powder, and black pepper, then fry them in batches until the skin shattered with each bite. The meat stayed juicy, while the coating turned crispy and flavorful, creating that perfect contrast that made fried chicken legendary in Black cooking traditions. Unlike turkey or whole chickens, wings fried quickly and could be prepared by multiple cooks simultaneously, making them practical for large gatherings. Children loved eating with their hands, while adults appreciated how wings stretched the poultry budget without sacrificing flavor.
Sugar water was the drink that filled cups when Kool-Aid ran out and milk was saved for morning cereal. Mothers stirred spoonfuls of white sugar into glasses of tap water, creating a sweet drink that cost almost nothing but gave children something to sip with meager suppers. The sweetness hit the tongue fast, providing a quick rush that made hunger feel less sharp. In summer, sugar water was served cold with ice. In winter, it was warmed on the stove, turning it into something that felt almost like a treat. Children drank it without question, because asking for more meant drawing attention to what the household lacked. Sugar water was never discussed at school, but in kitchens across Black neighborhoods, it was poured quietly into cups night after night. It was hydration with just enough sweetness to make poverty taste less bitter.
Potato and onion gravy over cornbread was one of those suppers that stretched simple ingredients into something far more satisfying than it looked. Families who did not have access to meat would fry onions in leftover drippings, add water and flour, and stir it into a thick brown gravy. That gravy, poured over wedges of cornbread, turned into a filling plate that could quiet hunger at the end of a long day. The onions gave sweetness, the drippings added depth, and the cornbread soaked it all up like a sponge. In African American households across the South, this became a dependable way to feed large families on very little. Cornmeal was cheap, onions were plentiful, and gravy turned scraps into a real meal. Children might not have known they were eating out of necessity because it tasted comforting and rich. This dish has faded as quick meals replaced slow stove cooking, but for many who grew up with it, the memory of potato and onion gravy over cornbread still means home and survival. You might wrinkle your nose, but fried rattlesnake was a real meal on the frontier. If you were living off the land, you ate what the land gave you, and sometimes that meant a coiled-up surprise near your boots. Rattlesnake meat was surprisingly tender and mild, almost like chicken, and once you peeled the skin and cleaned the bones, it fried up fast. Cornmeal crust gave it crunch, and a sprinkle of pepper or dried herbs gave it flavor. Folks who lived near the desert or in rocky canyons got used to seeing these snakes. Some made it a sport to hunt them, others just got desperate enough to try. Either way, you dipped the meat in egg, rolled it in cornmeal, and dropped it in hot fat. It sizzled, popped, and came out golden. Eaten with dandelion greens or roasted roots, it was more than just edible. It was a story. One you told around a fire long after the danger was gone. Shepherd's pie with leftover roast was the definition of reinvention, a masterpiece of thrift and comfort. Yesterday's scraps of meat were chopped fine, mixed with whatever vegetables had survived the week, and bound together with a splash of gravy. Sometimes a bit of leftover bread or oats thickened the filling, soaking up every ounce of flavor. On top went a layer of mashed potatoes, spread smooth with the back of a spoon, then dragged into peaks that browned beautifully in the oven. The smell was a blanket of warmth that wrapped the whole house. It was the kind of meal that could silence a room once served, everyone too busy savoring to speak. Families didn't need a lot to make it right, they just needed care and a cast-iron dish. It was food that turned hard times into shared joy, and scarcity into something that tasted abundant. Shepherd's pie was proof that love didn't show itself in grand gestures. It showed up in leftovers turned into miracles. Stewed chicken necks with dumplings were the kind of meal that reminded people what patience could create. Chicken necks were the cheapest part of the bird, often tossed aside, but families who knew better saw their worth. Simmered long and slow, the necks gave up every drop of flavor to the broth, turning it thick and savory. Dumplings made from flour and water floated on top, soaking in the rich juices until they puffed up soft and tender. It was poor man's comfort food, cooked with time instead of money. The aroma filled the home, drawing everyone to the table. Each bite was a lesson in gratitude, how something once overlooked could become a treasure. Kids loved pulling at the soft dough, dipping it into the golden broth, licking their fingers clean. It was a dish built on love and patience, two things that cost nothing but made everything taste better. Mothers often stood over the pot, stirring gently as if coaxing comfort out of thin air. Steam fogged up the windows, and neighbors passing by could smell that supper was close. It was the kind of food that filled both stomachs and hearts, reminding everyone that joy did not need money. It just needed warmth, care, and a little time.
Tomato gravy over rice was what happened on the nights when the money was thinner than the pot. A can of whole tomatoes crushed by hand, she never used a knife for that, dropped into bacon drippings with diced onion and a pinch of sugar to cut the acid, simmered until the tomatoes broke down into something thick and brick red and alive with fat. Spooned over a mound of white rice, done in 15 minutes, filling the plate like something that had taken all afternoon. What the rest of the country didn't understand was that this dish had roots older than anyone in that kitchen. Stewed tomatoes and rice traveled a direct line back to West African jollof traditions carried by enslaved people into the Gula Geechee coastal kitchens of South Carolina and Georgia and spread inland with every generation that moved. She never called it jollof, she called it supper. The taste was the same. Butter beans were a church supper cornerstone in African American households from the 1930s through the 1960s. What the rest of the country called lima beans, cooked here with a ham hock until the pot liquor thickened and the beans softened into something close to a gravy. The ham hock was the architecture of the dish, giving the broth its body and releasing strands of smoky meat that dissolved into the pot without being asked. Nothing about the process was rushed. You did not hurry butter beans, and anyone who tried ended up with a bowl that tasted correct but felt wrong, thin where it should have been rich. The women who made it right knew the dish was done when it smelled finished, not when the clock said so. Before the stew, you had dried beans and a bone. After, you had something that held a whole afternoon inside it. She made it every third Sunday through the fall in the same dented pot she had carried north from Georgia in 1951. When she died, the pot stayed on the stove for 3 days before anyone moved it. A half pound of ground beef could become a full dinner if you knew what to do with the grease left behind. Hamburger steak and onion gravy stretched cheap meat into something that smelled like a Sunday kitchen on a Wednesday night. The beef was seasoned with salt, pepper, and garlic powder, shaped into a thick oval patty, and pan-fried in cast iron until browned on both sides. The patty came out, sliced onions went into the same grease, cooking down until soft and golden. A spoonful of flour stirred into the fat, then water or broth added slowly while scraping the bottom. That's where the flavor lived, in the fond, in the bits that stuck. The gravy thickened, dark and rich. The patty went back in to simmer until tender and served over white rice. It was a complete meal for under $1. Seniors who cooked this alone often made enough gravy to save, poured over toast the next morning. It became breakfast too. The women who perfected this gravy never measured the flour. They watched the color and knew.
Cornmeal pancakes were breakfast made when wheat flour was gone, but cornmeal was plentiful, creating flat golden cakes that tasted like home and comfort. Black mothers would mix cornmeal with a little flour if they had it, add milk or buttermilk, an egg, and a spoonful of sugar, then drop the batter onto a hot greased griddle. The pancakes cooked quickly, developing brown spots on the bottom before being flipped to cook the other side, creating a slightly gritty texture that was hearty and filling. These pancakes appeared regularly on 1960s tables when money was tight and wheat flour cost more than families could afford, but cornmeal was cheap and stretched further. Children ate them with syrup or molasses, sometimes just butter and sugar when syrup ran out, making them sweet enough to feel like a treat even when they were born from necessity. A bag of cornmeal cost less than $1 and lasted for weeks, meaning these pancakes could be made whenever hunger struck without worrying about the budget.
Number 14, Sunday neck bones with rice and pot liquor. The dish that anchored the family table from Mississippi to Memphis. A blue speckled roaster on a coal range in 1949 Greenwood. 4 pounds of pork neck bones rinsed and salted, laid in a single layer. The cook poured a quart of water over them, added 1 yellow onion sliced rough, 3 garlic cloves crushed under a knife, a bay leaf, a long shake of black pepper. She covered the pot with a heavy iron lid, slid it to the back burner. The heat ran low. For 3 hours, the neck bones rendered their fat. The bones gave up their marrow into a dark, glossy pot liquor. The kitchen smelled like every Sunday she could remember from her own mother's kitchen in Yazoo City. The same smell rose at the same hour from every black household for 1,000 miles. The rice cooked in a separate pot with the broth and a teaspoon of lard. The bones came out. She laid them on a platter under a clean dish towel. The gravy was thickened with a slurry of flour and cold water. She served the rice in a bowl, ladled pot lacquer into the center, piled the meat from the bones on top, a side of stewed cabbage with bacon ends. The Sunday after the funeral, she made it for 35 people in the church basement. 9 pounds of neck bones the butcher sold her for $2 and a kind word about her late husband. The pot liquor that day fed mourners who had not eaten since Friday afternoon. By 1990, the supermarket had stopped stocking neck bones that big. The recipe survived only in the heads of women born before 1955. The dish was the working answer to a paycheck that ran out before payday. It wasn't the recipe that died, it was the cut. A cook could buy 4 pounds for a quarter once. You can't find them at all now. You can't even ask the butcher. That's how a tradition disappears without anyone noticing the day it left. Number 13, smothered turkey wings. A pound of fresh turkey wings cost 19 cents at the meat counter in 1957. Most white shoppers passed the wings by because they didn't know what to do with them. Your grandmother knew exactly what to do. She washed the wings in cold water, dredged them in flour, seasoned with salt, black pepper, garlic powder, and a pinch of poultry seasoning, and browned them in a skillet of bacon grease until the skin was crisp like paper. Then the wings went into a deep pot with 2 yellow onions, 3 stalks of celery, and 4 cups of water. The lid went on. The pot simmered on the back burner for 2.5 hours. By supper time, the meat was falling off the bone and the broth had turned into a thick mahogany gravy. She served the wings over rice with the gravy ladled across both. 6 children licked their fingers clean. You'd watch the wing bones get picked over twice. Number 20, neck bones and cabbage. A whole head of cabbage cost almost nothing, and when you cut it into wedges and dropped it into a pot of neck bones that had been simmering all day, it turned into something entirely different from raw cabbage. The leaves went soft and silky and took on all that pork and pepper flavor. The cabbage wedges held their shape just enough to lift them out with a slotted spoon and set them on the plate next to the bones. This was a common Monday dinner across the South, the start of a new week on a tight budget. 1 head of cabbage, 1 pack of neck bones, and the whole family ate. The pot liquor from this one was especially good, almost sweet from the cabbage. Here's something worth understanding about neck bones. For most of the 20th century, they were treated as waste. Butchers trimmed them off the larger cuts and sold them for almost nothing, or simply handed them over to whoever asked. In many grocery stores across the South, the neck bones and pig feet and hog maws sat in a separate case, sometimes near the back. The customers who bought them were almost always black. This was not an accident. Generations of black families had learned to build entire meals from the parts of the animal that plantation kitchens discarded. What started as forced scarcity became culinary knowledge that passed from mother to daughter across 2 centuries. The butcher thought he was selling scraps. The woman buying them knew she was carrying home 3 dinners. That knowledge, the understanding of what heat and time and seasoning could pull from a bone, was worth more than anything printed in a cookbook.
Sorghum oat cakes provided hearty energy for long days while demanding barely any time to prepare. Rolled oats were quickly cooked in hot water until soft, then mixed with a generous pour of sorghum syrup for natural sweetness. The warm mixture was pressed into small cakes and lightly browned in a hot skillet, forming a crisp exterior while staying tender inside. Their nutty aroma and gentle sweetness made them a favorite for both breakfast and late-night snacks, offering quick nourishment without expensive ingredients. Families appreciated how the oats filled stomachs, and the sorghum added a rich, earthy flavor that refined sugar could not match. In households where every penny mattered, these cakes proved that a simple pantry could still produce something special in minutes. They traveled well too, wrapped in cloth for field work or school lunches, ensuring no one went hungry between meals. Sorghum oatcakes embodied the spirit of making do with what you had, transforming basic staples into a warm, sustaining dish that tasted far richer than its cost.
Number 25, scrambled eggs stretched with bread. In a kitchen where 6 children needed supper and the icebox held 4 eggs, a mother in Greenville, South Carolina, tore day-old bread into small pieces, soaked them in a splash of milk, then scrambled everything together with the eggs and bacon grease until the bread disappeared into the curds. The plate looked full. The children did not know half of what they were eating was bread. A loaf cost 14 cents in 1952. Eggs was 60 cents a dozen, 5 cents per egg stretched across 6 plates with 10 cents worth of bread. That was the math. That was every night. Mothers across the South did not have cookbooks for this. They had instinct sharpened by decades of making something look like enough when it was not. A child went to bed thinking they had eaten eggs. The mother knew the truth, but the child was full, and that was the only arithmetic that mattered.
Collard greens cooked with smoked turkey tails instead of ham hocks provided the traditional side dish at a fraction of the cost, turning a bag of greens into nourishment that carried flavor and cultural meaning. Turkey tails, often overlooked and heavily discounted at butcher counters, contained enough fat and smokiness to season an entire pot for under $2. Black mothers would buy 3 or 4 pounds of fresh collards from produce stands where vegetables stayed affordable. The greens were washed repeatedly until no grit remained, then chopped and added to pots where turkey tails had been simmering with onions and vinegar. Hours of slow cooking broke down the greens until they turned silky, while pot liquor became broth so flavorful that people sipped it from cups. This wasn't just a side dish, but vitamin-rich vegetables that provided essential nutrients. Families served collards alongside everything else, understanding that greens represented prosperity.
Government cheese arrived in plain cardboard boxes, distributed at community centers to families who qualified for assistance. The cheese was bright orange, processed into 5-pound blocks that could feed a household for weeks. It melted smoothly into grits, topped crackers for snacks, and made grilled cheese sandwiches that tasted better than anything store-bought. Children learned not to mention government cheese at school because it marked their families as poor. But at home, that orange block was treasure, sliced thick for sandwiches and grated into whatever needed flavor. The cheese was salty and rich, providing calcium and protein to growing bodies that might not have gotten enough otherwise. Government cheese was poverty assistance that actually tasted good, a rare gift from a system that usually offered little comfort.
Cow tongue stew was another dish that stretched thrift into flavor, simmering what others discarded into something deeply satisfying. Tongue was cheap and often overlooked, but when braised slowly with onions, peppers, and garlic, it became tender and rich. The meat had a texture similar to roast beef, making it both hearty and comforting. Families who could not afford expensive cuts relied on tongue as an affordable way to bring meat to the table. Served over rice or potatoes, it filled plates and stomachs without emptying wallets. Though some children avoided it once they knew what it was, many still loved the taste and never forgot it. Cow tongue stew represented resilience, using skill and patience to make overlooked parts of the animal delicious. Today it is rare to see it served, but in the 1950s it was a sign of both thrift and pride in the kitchen. It showed that nothing was wasted and everything could be made into supper. Hominy was corn but tougher. It had to be soaked in lye, boiled until it puffed and split, then rinsed again and again to make it safe to eat. What came out was chewy, earthy, and just strange enough to feel like something ancient. It was not the kind of corn you threw on the cob. This was corn that had been through something. Fatback, on the other hand, was just what it sounded like. Thick slices of pork fat, cured with enough salt to last through the hottest summers and coldest winters. On their own, each ingredient was rough. But together, they became a dish that worked like fuel. You layered the hominy and fatback in a pot, sometimes added a little grease or onion, and baked it until it bubbled up thick and heavy. The top might brown if the fire was hot enough, but even when it did not, nobody turned it down. It was dense, it was greasy, and it stuck to your ribs like armor. In a place where meals were counted in effort, not elegance, this one always showed up on time. It did not ask to be liked, just eaten. Egg and potato hash was the meal that turned yesterday's scraps into tonight's feast. It began with leftover boiled or roasted potatoes, chopped into rough cubes and tossed into a skillet slick with grease or butter. The potatoes browned at the edges, crisping beautifully while onions caramelized beside them, adding sweetness and aroma. Then came the eggs, cracked right into the pan, sizzling as they set and pulling everything together. Sometimes, a splash of milk or a handful of cheese found its way in, but even plain, it was hearty enough to feed a crowd. The smell of fried onions and eggs filled the air, waking appetites and hearts alike. Families didn't need meat when they had this. It was rich, flavorful, and deeply satisfying. Each forkful carried warmth, care, and the quiet ingenuity of cooks who refused to waste a thing. Egg and potato hash wasn't just a dish, it was a philosophy. It whispered, "Make do, be proud, feed your own." It proved that even the simplest food, made with love, could taste like triumph.
Skillet pork and sweet potatoes was the kind of supper that turned two cheap ingredients into something that looked and tasted deliberate. Pork shoulder pieces or country-style ribs cut into chunks and browned in lard until the edges crisped, then sweet potatoes peeled and diced into the same skillet, cubes small so they'd cook fast, with a splash of water to steam everything through. A lid dropped on, and the heat kept at medium for 12 minutes until the potatoes were fork tender and had soaked up every bit of pork fat in the pan. The combination was older than the skillet itself. West African food traditions paired yams and pork centuries before the American South claimed the combination as its own, and the sweet potato, botanically distinct from the yam but occupying the same cultural space in black kitchens, brought natural sweetness that needed no sugar added. A little hot sauce on the side, maybe a wedge of cornbread if there was time. Done. Nobody called it a rice bowl back then. It was just supper, the kind pulled together on a Thursday when the big church pot was days gone and the week had not been kind. Vienna sausages came in a small can that cost almost nothing, and in black households from the 1950s through the 1980s, that can was always on the shelf. You sliced the sausages thin, browned them until the edges crisped, then laid them over white rice with a pour of the canned liquid to make a thin, salty sauce. Some people added hot sauce, some folded a slice of white bread over the bowl. The whole thing took 10 minutes and tasted like being taken care of, even when the person who used to take care of you was no longer there. That is what those small cans held, not just protein, but a particular comfort that no proper recipe could explain to someone who did not grow up reaching for one on a long, quiet evening. A tin key, a slow peel of metal, and the sharp smell of oil and salt, sardines and crackers with hot sauce needed no stove and no explanation. In black households across the South, a can of sardines was a full meal eaten standing at the counter or sitting by the window with a sleeve of saltines and a bottle of Louisiana or Crystal. They came packed in mustard sauce, tomato sauce, or plain oil, and every person had their preference, argued about with the same conviction as church denominations. You ate them one at a time, laid across a cracker, dotted with hot sauce, followed by a sip of something cold. During the 1950s and 60s, a tin cost 10 or 15 cents, making it one of the cheapest proteins on the shelf. For elderly folks living alone, sardines were dinner on nights when cooking felt like too much and the body just needed fuel. No pan to wash, no grease to cool, just a tin, a knife, and the quiet rhythm of feeding yourself when nobody else was coming to the table.
Scrambled eggs with green onions elevated plain eggs into something that tasted fresh and flavorful, using green onions chopped fine and stirred into beaten eggs before cooking. Black mothers would heat a little oil or butter in a skillet, pour in the egg mixture, and stir constantly until everything set into soft curds that were creamy and studded with bright green onion pieces. The onions added a sharp, fresh bite that cut through the richness of the eggs, making a simple meal taste more complex and satisfying. This dish appeared regularly when gardens produced more green onions than families knew what to do with, turning abundant vegetables into breakfast, lunch, or dinner depending on what was needed. Children ate these eggs without complaint because they tasted better than plain scrambled eggs, and the green bits made the plate look more interesting. A dozen eggs cost less than 60 cents. Green onions grew easily in any patch of dirt, and the entire meal could be on the table in under 5 minutes.
Number 21, cornmeal mush with skim milk gravy. A cast iron skillet on a coal stove in 1943 Detroit. A cup of yellow cornmeal whisked into 3 cups of boiling salted water. The cook stirred it for 20 minutes. It pulled away from the sides of the pan in one piece, glossy and yellow as a winter sun. She poured it into a loaf tin, let it set firm overnight on the cold side of the porch. Morning came. She sliced it half an inch thick, fried each piece in a teaspoon of bacon grease, topped it with skim milk gravy. The supper cost 6 cents and fed 3. The mill on Hastings Street ground the meal. The milkman delivered the skim-free because nobody wanted it. Every black household in your block kept a coffee can of bacon grease on the stove, the kitchen heart of your neighborhood. By 1972, both were gone. Number 17, fried chicken livers. When a chicken was dressed for Sunday, the livers were never thrown out because they made a supper all their own. These little dark morsels came nearly free, the part most folks today never think to cook. The cook would rinse them, roll them in seasoned flour, and slide them into hot grease where they spit and crackled and crisped up fast. The outside turned crunchy and brown, while the inside stayed soft and rich. A few minutes was all they needed, and a small bowl of them went a long way. Some families served them over rice with a spoon of pan gravy. Others piled them onto a plate with hot sauce and ate them with their fingers straight from the skillet. Cheap, quick, and deeply savory, fried chicken livers turned a handful of giblets into a real meal, a reminder that nothing on the bird ever went to waste. Number 23, neck bones and mustard greens. Mustard greens had a bite that no other green in the garden could match. Raw, they burned the back of the tongue. Cooked low in a pot of neck bones for 2 hours, that burn softened into a peppery warmth that cut clean through the richness of the pork. Families in Alabama and Mississippi planted mustard greens alongside collards, but the mustard came up faster and tolerated poorer soil. The leaves were thinner, more ragged, and they shrank down to almost nothing in the pot, which meant you needed a bigger armload to fill a bowl. The pot liquor ran pale green with a sharp edge that some people preferred over the heavier, darker liquor from collards. Children who turned their noses up at the greens still sopped the liquor with cornbread because that peppery broth tasted like the bones dressed up in something new. This was a weeknight pot that asked for nothing but time, a handful of greens, and whatever neck bones the butcher had left.
Red-eye ham gravy over grits provided a powerful start to the morning with almost no weight at all. Thin slices of ham were quickly fried until their edges crisped and their fat rendered into the pan. Then a strong pour of black coffee was added to create the signature red-eye gravy. The hot liquid hissed as it loosened the savory bits from the skillet, blending into a smoky, salty brew that smelled like dawn itself. Meanwhile, Yesterday's leftover grits were reheated with a splash of water until creamy once again, ready to cradle the bold sauce. In less than 10 minutes, the meal was ready, the deep flavor of ham and coffee soaking into every spoonful. Workers heading into long days treasured this combination for its hearty comfort and jolt of caffeine, a breakfast that woke the senses and filled the stomach in equal measure. Red-eye ham gravy over grits turned simple scraps into something that tasted like luxury.
Number 21, salt pork and gravy. Salt pork was the cheapest cut at the butcher counter, a slab of cured pork belly, mostly fat with a thin ribbon of meat running through. You sliced it thin and fried it in a skillet until the fat rendered and the edges turned crispy. Then you pulled the meat out, sprinkled flour into the drippings, stirred until golden, and poured in milk to make a thick white gravy. That gravy went over rice, over biscuits, over whatever was on the plate. The salt pork itself was almost a garnish. The gravy was the real meal. In 1954, salt pork cost 29 cents a pound. A pound made gravy for a week. Black families in the rural South ate salt pork gravy the way other Americans ate butter. It went on everything. It stretched everything. It turned a plate of plain rice into supper. The taste was salt and smoke and richness. Not meat, not really, but it disguised how little actual meat was involved.
Cornbread dressing, made from dried-out bread and day-old cornbread, turned stale leftovers into the savory stuffing that anchored Thanksgiving plates throughout Black communities. Mothers saved bread ends, biscuit pieces, and cornbread scraps in bags for weeks before the holiday, letting them air dry until rock hard so they'd absorb maximum liquid without turning mushy. On Thanksgiving morning, those saved breads would be crumbled and mixed with sautéed celery, onions, and sage, then moistened with chicken broth made from boiling backs and necks. Some women added finely chopped giblets, while others relied purely on vegetables and herbs for flavor. The dressing had to be moist enough to hold together but dry enough to crisp on top when baked. This wasn't bread cubes from expensive store-bought loaves, but carefully accumulated scraps transformed through skill. The golden brown top provided textural contrast to soft interior. For Black families, cornbread dressing represented resourcefulness, elevated to tradition.
Water gravy and biscuits was the meal that appeared when milk ran out, but flour and drippings remained. Mothers would heat leftover bacon grease in a cast iron skillet, stir in flour until it browned, then add water instead of milk to create a thin but savory gravy. The gravy was poured hot over split biscuits, which soaked up every drop and turned soft on the tongue. It was bland compared to milk gravy, but for hungry children, it was a warm meal that filled the emptiness inside. Families made water gravy without shame because it kept everyone fed when resources were scarce. The dish required only pantry staples most households had on hand, making it reliable during the hardest stretches of the month. Water gravy was a lesson in making something from almost nothing, a skill passed down through generations who knew hunger.
Boiled collards with salted fish was a dish rooted in coastal traditions, where dried or salted fish met the greens of the field. Collard greens, simmered long with pieces of fish, absorbed the salty flavor and produced a broth that families called pot liquor. Served with cornbread on the side, it became a full meal that delivered both nutrition and satisfaction. This dish tied African American kitchens to older traditions of using preserved fish as seasoning when fresh meat was unavailable. The salt balanced the bitterness of the collards while the fish gave body and protein to the broth. Families loved it because it was affordable and could feed everyone at the table. Children might not have enjoyed the strong flavor, but it carried cultural meaning that extended beyond taste. Though rarely seen today, boiled collards with salted fish once represented a connection between land and sea, resourcefulness and survival, and the enduring tradition of turning simple ingredients into communal suppers. This was no frozen grocery store pie. Venison pot pie came from hunters and homesteaders, made with fresh-shot deer meat that had been stewed for hours over low heat. It was mixed with carrots, potatoes, or wild onions if you had them, and poured into a rough pie crust made from flour and lard. The crust was thick, never flaky, and it needed to be. It had to hold up against days-old stew and keep well without a refrigerator. The pie would bake in a heavy Dutch oven, often buried in coals, while the smell filled the entire cabin. It was a special dinner, usually reserved for after a good hunt or around holidays when families gathered. You could slice it like cake and serve it warm or cold. It tasted like salt, smoke, and hard-earned luck. If you had enough venison to make two, you stored one under a towel for the next day. No one ever said no to a second helping. This creamed peas on toast was the quiet triumph of the thrifty kitchen, where love turned scarcity into satisfaction. When meat ran out, mothers reached for canned peas, butter, and a little flour to make magic happen. The butter melted into the pan, bubbling with the promise of warmth, and a spoonful of flour thickened it into a creamy roux. A splash of milk turned everything smooth and velvety, coating each green pea in a blanket of comfort. The toast, simple white bread browned on a pan or in the oven, waited like a canvas for the sauce to spill across it. The smell was gentle, buttery, and sweet, the kind that made a house feel like home. It was a meal made in minutes but remembered for years. Families sat together at small tables, passing plates with gratitude and quiet joy. It was humble, yes, but never empty. It fed both hunger and hope. Creamed peas on toast was more than a supper. It was a reminder that gentleness in cooking could make even the hardest days feel soft again. Ramen noodles with hot sauce and eggs might sound simple, but for many families in the 1970s, it was a miracle in a bowl. A few packs could feed everyone, and all it needed was water, fire, and imagination. The noodles curled in the pot, soaking up every bit of spice and salt, while the eggs dropped in and turned silky. Hot sauce gave it life, that fiery bite that cut through the sameness of struggle. It was quick, cheap, and hot, a meal that tasted like satisfaction. The whole house smelled faintly of pepper and pride. People called it poor folks' comfort food, but it was clever too, proof that creativity beats money any day. When you had nothing but still made something good, you learned to see joy in the smallest things. That bowl was proof that flavor, like hope, could always be stretched.
Sardines and hot rice was the supper that fed a family when the week had nothing left. A flat tin of sardines in tomato sauce, not oil, always tomato sauce, because the sauce was part of the dish, stirred directly into just cooked white rice with diced onion and a shake of hot sauce, heated 3 minutes until the fish broke apart into the grains. Done before the rice cooled. Canned sardines cost almost nothing, required no refrigeration, and delivered more protein per penny than nearly any other item on the grocery shelf, which is exactly why this Great Depression staple followed Black families north through the Great Migration without losing a step. Some households added a sliced hard-boiled egg on top. She added pepper and a prayer of thanks and called it ready. The kids ate every grain. Crowder peas showed up in every Black kitchen in the rural South in quantities that could feed the whole congregation. A variety of field pea named for the way seeds crowd each other in the pod. Crowder peas had been a Southern Black farming staple since before the Civil War, and by the 1940s, they were as tied to late summer church suppers as anything else on the table. You cooked them with fatback, a piece of smoked pork that gave the pot a low, savory richness, and let them go until the pot liquor turned cloudy and the peas softened but held their shape. The fatback was not window dressing, it was the chemistry. Rendered fat coated the starch in each pea, making them silky instead of chalky. You could use the same peas on the same stove and miss the dish entirely by adding the fatback too late. What looked like a simple pot of field peas was in fact precision that nobody around that stove called precision because they had always known it without a word for it. If you didn't cut slits in the bologna before it hit the skillet, you weren't from the right kitchen. Fried bologna with white bread was a 10-cent dinner that showed up on tables across every black neighborhood in the 1960s and 70s, not because anyone planned it, but because the refrigerator was low and the energy was lower. A thick slice of Oscar Mayer or store-brand bologna went into a dry skillet over medium heat. Without those slits, two cuts like a cross, the meat would dome up in the center and burn at the edges. Done right, the bologna curled slightly, browned in spots, and developed a salty crust that no fancy charcuterie could match. Laid on soft white bread with yellow mustard or a smear of mayonnaise, it was dinner in 4 minutes. Some added a slice of American cheese, others put hot sauce on the bread first, and the old folks who ate it alone at night, they didn't need sides. Just a sandwich, a glass of sweet tea, and the television on low.
Fried salt pork and grits was a breakfast that often became supper, combining two staples that appeared in black kitchens daily. Salt pork was sliced thin and fried until fat rendered out and meat turned crispy, creating crunchy pieces children called cracklins and fought over eagerly. The rendered fat was saved while crispy pork was served hot alongside creamy grits stirred smooth with butter and salt. The saltiness of pork complemented mild corn flavor of grits perfectly, creating a combination that satisfied hunger and provided energy for long hours ahead. Black mothers could have this meal on the table in minutes since grits cooked quickly, and salt pork fried even faster, making it ideal for nights when time was tighter than the food budget. A slab of salt pork cost under $1 and lasted days, while grits were bought in bulk for pennies per serving, meaning this entire meal cost almost nothing but filled stomachs completely.
Number 18, smothered oxtails with onion. A heavy enamel Dutch oven on a coal range in 1947, Cleveland. 4 pounds of oxtails, dredged in flour, browned on every side. They wore a dark crust. The cook poured off most of the grease, added 2 yellow onions, sliced thick, 3 cloves of garlic, a quart of beef broth from the bones the day before. She covered the pot, slid it to the back of the range, let it braise 4 hours while she did the wash. The oxtails came out fork tender. The gravy was the color of strong coffee. The onions had melted into the sauce. She served it over white rice with stewed collards and a wedge of cornbread fresh from the oven. The dish fed 6 for 35 cents in 1947. That was the whole bill. Your grandfather ate it on Sunday after church, the way his father had before him. It signaled your family had survived another week. Number 18, Hoppin' John. Born in the low country rice fields, this one-pot supper carried West Africa straight to the southern table. It came from the Gullah Geechee people of coastal South Carolina, descendants of enslaved Africans who paired the rice they knew how to grow with black-eyed peas, a legume with deep African roots. Food historians trace it back to Tibo Niebe, a Senegalese rice and bean dish, and to wake from Ghana. The cooking was plain and forgiving. Black-eyed peas simmered with a piece of smoked pork until soft. Then rice went into the same pot to cook in that seasoned liquid until the grains drank it all up. 1 pot, 2 cheap staples, and a scrap of pork was enough to feed everyone at the table. By New Year's, the dish carried meaning too. The peas standing for coins and good luck in the year ahead. Filling, frugal, and rooted in history older than the South itself. Number 22, neck bones and green beans. Fresh green beans snapped between the fingers came out of the garden all summer long, and when there were too many to eat raw or fry up quick, they went into the neck bone pot. The beans cooked until they lost every trace of crunch and turned soft and gray-green, saturated with pork fat. Nobody in those kitchens wanted a crisp green bean. Crisp meant undercooked. Done meant the bean had given up its resistance and taken on the flavor of everything around it. A plate of neck bones and green beans with a cold glass of buttermilk beside it was a July supper that did not try to impress anyone. It just filled the house with the smell of slow pork and kept the family quiet until the sun went down. In parts of rural Arkansas and East Texas, families strung green beans on thread and hung them to dry for winter, then rehydrated them in a neck bone pot months later. Those dried beans, called leather britches, came back tougher and chewier with a concentrated flavor the fresh ones never had.
Field pea stir-fry turned leftover peas into a 10-minute marvel, saving both time and precious ingredients. Pre-cooked field peas were tossed into a hot skillet with diced onions and small cubes of smoked salt pork, the fat sizzling as it released a savory aroma. A quick splash of vinegar or a grind of black pepper added brightness, while the peas heated through, soaking up the smoky flavor. The dish went from cold to steaming in less time than it took to set the table, offering a hearty side or even a full meal with a piece of bread. For families working long days in the fields, this recipe fit perfectly between dawn chores and midday labor, delivering protein and comfort without delay. The simple combination of earthy peas and salty pork made each bite deeply satisfying, proof that even the humblest leftovers could be reborn into something new and memorable with only a hot pan and a few quick turns of the spoon.
Treasure. Here's what nobody says about these dinners. They were not just about money, they were about time. A black woman in the 1950s who worked as a domestic, cooked breakfast, lunch, and dinner for someone else's family. Then she came home and cooked again. The meals on this list had to be possible after a 12-hour day on someone else's feet. They had to be made tired. They had to be made in a kitchen that was too hot in summer and too cold in winter, with children underfoot and a husband who might or might not come home for supper. These women were not leisurely cooks following recipes from a magazine. They were exhausted women who stood at a stove because sitting down felt like giving up. The most important quality of every meal on this list is not that it was cheap, it is that it was possible. That is what kept families fed.
Sweet potato pie made from scratch with lard crust became the dessert that delivered holiday sweetness without requiring expensive ingredients, turning humble root vegetables into celebration. Black mothers baked their own sweet potatoes until soft, then mashed them with evaporated milk, eggs, sugar, and warm spices like cinnamon, nutmeg, and vanilla when affordable. The filling was rich, smooth, and naturally sweet, requiring less added sugar than other desserts, making it economical and delicious. Pie crusts made with lard rather than butter saved money while producing flaky, tender pastry. Some women topped their pies with meringue made from leftover egg whites, creating impressive height without additional cost, while others left them plain. A single pie cost less than $2 in ingredients, yet could be sliced into 12 portions, making it far more economical than cakes. The pies were often baked the day before Thanksgiving.
Syrup. Sandwiches were the sweet solution when the pantry held nothing but bread and a bottle of caro or pancake syrup. Children watched as mothers folded soft white bread around thick drizzles of golden syrup, creating a sticky, filling meal that satisfied cravings for both dinner and dessert. The syrup soaked into the bread, making it soft and almost cake-like, helping children pretend they were eating something special. There was no protein, no vegetables, nothing nutritious beyond calories, but it was enough to send kids to bed without hunger pains. Syrup sandwiches appeared when paychecks stretched too thin. They were eaten quickly and never mentioned outside the home. For children who grew up on them, the taste of cheap corn syrup still triggers memories of lean times when sweetness was the only comfort available.
Cornmeal dumplings in pot liquor were a staple of Southern African American kitchens, where nothing went to waste. After collard greens or turnip greens were boiled, the leftover broth, rich with nutrients and pork flavor, was called pot liquor. Cornmeal dumplings, simple mixtures of cornmeal and water, were dropped into that broth and simmered until tender. The result was a starch-heavy, comforting dish that cost pennies but filled stomachs. Families valued it because it made the most of what was already cooking, turning leftovers into a whole new meal. For children, dumplings in pot liquor were warm and familiar, often tied to memories of sitting around the table with family. The dish reflected both resourcefulness and tradition, showing how African American households transformed scraps into suppers that carried meaning. Though rare today, cornmeal dumplings in pot liquor stand as one of the most powerful examples of thrift meeting comfort. They were practical, soulful, and unforgettable for those who grew up eating them. Pemmican was survival food at its most basic: dried meat, fat, and berries mashed into cakes that could last for months without spoiling. But out on the frontier, folks found ways to turn it into something hot and hearty when supplies ran low. Enter the pemmican hot dish, which was exactly what it sounded like. Pemmican fried up in a skillet with whatever else was on hand: onions, turnips, wild greens, or even a spoonful of leftover beans. The meat, usually deer or buffalo, had been dried until leathery and ground into pieces. The fat came from tallow, rendered down in iron pots until it was clear and clean. It all came together in one sizzling, heavy pan. It did not smell great, but it tasted like energy, and it gave you the strength to do whatever was needed the next day. You could eat it with a biscuit or flatbread if you had any left, but often you just scooped it straight from the pan with your knife. This was the kind of food you made when there was no room for complaints. You ate it quietly, with the fire spitting and the wind outside your cabin walls. It filled the space where comfort used to live. Stuffed bell peppers with rice and tomato sauce were the pride of thrifty kitchens. Mothers would line up bright green peppers on the counter, slicing off the tops and scooping out the seeds with care. A single pound of ground meat, beef if you were lucky, or whatever was on sale, was stretched with rice, onions, and breadcrumbs until it could feed the whole family. The mixture was packed into each pepper, standing tall in a baking dish before being smothered in tomato sauce. As it baked, the scent filled the house with warmth, tangy and savory all at once. The peppers softened, the sauce thickened, and dinner became something that looked fancy even when it cost next to nothing. Families gathered around the table, cutting through the soft vegetables to reveal the hearty filling inside. It was a meal that brought pride, not pity, proof that resourcefulness could taste like celebration. Every bite carried the balance of thrift and love, where nothing went to waste and everything felt like home. Boiled potatoes with canned meat was the kind of dinner that taught people how to survive on imagination alone. It did not matter whether the can said Spam, Vienna sausages, or potted meat. Whatever was on sale or left on the shelf was enough. Potatoes were boiled soft until they nearly fell apart, then mashed together with slices of salty meat that glistened in the pan. The smell was simple but comforting, a mix of salt and starch that spoke of home. The dish filled bellies fast, which was all that mattered when money was low and appetites were big. Some added onions or a bit of grease to give it life. Others poured the leftover liquid from the can into the pot for flavor. Every version was different, but every version told the same story, making the best out of the least. Families gathered around chipped plates, grateful for something warm after a long day. The sizzle of meat hitting the pan was a small victory against hunger. Children did not care where it came from. It was dinner, it was hot, and it was theirs. Those canned goods were the quiet heroes of the kitchen, turning a bare pantry into a meal that tasted like endurance. Poverty might have taken choices, but it never took pride, and nothing proved that better than a pot of boiled potatoes and canned meat cooked with heart.
Slow cooker arrived to pretend it had invented one-pot cooking. Your grandmother was already doing this with a Dutch oven and a gas flame set to medium-low. Potted chicken with rice meant bone-in chicken pieces, thighs and drumsticks, never breast, because breast meat goes dry and she didn't raise anyone who wasted money on dry chicken. Seasoned with salt, pepper, garlic powder, and paprika, browned in a little oil until the skin went gold, then set aside while diced onion and bell pepper softened in the same pot. The rice went in dry, stirred once in the drippings to coat every grain, then the chicken went back on top, and just enough water or broth poured over to cover. The lid went on, the heat dropped. 8 minutes in, and the kitchen smelled like Sunday. She learned this method from her own mother, who had learned it in a kitchen where measuring cups didn't exist, and the only instruction was to watch until it looked right. Nobody in that house asked what was for supper twice. That pot answered every question before you finished asking it. The sound of fresh cut corn hitting hot butter in cast iron, that sharp hiss followed by sweetness rising off the skillet. Fried corn existed in the hands of the cook. You cut the kernels low off the cob, then scrape the back of the blade down the rows to collect the milk, that pale, starchy liquid, because without it, you had cooked corn. With it, you had something that went creamy at the center and caramelized at the edges. Cast iron was a requirement, not a preference. The sugars needed the even, dry heat that only a seasoned skillet could deliver. In the 1950s and 60s, late summer Sundays after church meant someone shucking ears on the back porch while the kitchen door stood open. That hiss of milk and hot butter was the sound of Sunday being exactly what it was supposed to be, and everyone in hearing distance knew it. Grits with butter was breakfast, lunch, or dinner, depending on what you served alongside. Proof that the simplest dishes often provided the deepest comfort. Stone ground or regular grits were cooked slowly with water or milk, stirred frequently to prevent lumps, until they reached a creamy consistency that held its shape on a spoon. A generous pat of butter stirred in at the end added richness that transformed humble corn into something almost luxurious. For seniors on fixed incomes, grits cost pennies per serving and satisfied hunger for hours. They could be dressed up with cheese, topped with eggs, or served alongside fish, sausage, or vegetables. The dish required patience but little active work, and the reward was a bowl full of warmth that connected you to generations of Southern tables where grits was simply a part of life.
Fried potatoes with onions was comfort food that appeared on tables several times a week, using potatoes sliced thin and fried with onions until both became golden brown and soft inside. Black mothers would heat oil or bacon grease in cast iron, add sliced potatoes and onions together, then cover the pan so everything cooked through quickly without burning. The potatoes developed crispy edges while staying tender inside, and onions softened into sweet, caramelized strings that wove through every bite, creating a dish that was simple but deeply satisfying. This meal appeared constantly because potatoes were cheap, onions were cheaper, and together they created something filling enough to be a main dish when meat was unavailable. Children ate these potatoes with ketchup or hot sauce, scraping plates clean and asking for seconds that mothers somehow always managed to provide. A 5-pound bag of potatoes cost under 50 cents. Onions were pennies each, and cooking fat was saved from previous meals.
Number 23, chicken neck stew with rice. A Memphis butcher in 1942 sold chicken necks for a nickel a pound, sometimes gave them away on Saturday night. The case had to be empty by Monday. She bought 4 pounds, simmered them in salted water with 1 onion and 3 peppercorns for 2 hours. The meat slid off the bone, the broth ran cloudy, the rice cooked in the pot liquor, no extra water. The necks went on top to keep warm. She stripped the meat with 2 forks at the table while the children watched and learned. That was how every Memphis cook taught her daughter. The dish fed 7 for 30 cents. The Memphis paper printed it next to a war bond ad and a coupon for canned milk. In those years, nobody threw away the necks. By 1968, the supermarket sold whole chickens, cheap enough that nobody bothered. The butcher case stopped stocking them around 1974. Year after year, the cut got harder to find. You can't even ask for them today. Number 10, hog head cheese. Out of the one part of the pig the big house refused to touch, black cooks made a cold, savory loaf that fed a family for days. Despite the name, there was no cheese in it at all. After a hog was slaughtered, the head was boiled for hours along with the feet until every scrap of meat loosened from the bone and the fat and gelatin melted into the water. The cook picked the meat clean by hand, chopped it fine, and seasoned it hard with onion, black pepper, sage, and often a good shot of vinegar for the version they called sauce. All of it went back into a loaf pan where the natural gelatin from the feet set the whole thing into a firm, sliceable jelly as it cooled overnight. The next day, it came out of the pan in one solid block, ready to be cut cold and laid on bread or eaten with crackers. Nothing from the head went to waste, not the ears, not the snout, not a bit of it. A frugal masterpiece that turned the humblest scraps into something to slice and savor. Number 24, smothered neck bones with onion gravy. The bones were browned first in a cast iron skillet, then buried under sliced yellow onions that cooked down until they turned soft and sweet. A little flour went into the pan drippings to thicken it. The gravy built itself around the bones, dark and rich and heavy enough to stand a spoon in. This was not a light meal. This was a plate you set down in front of someone who had been working outside since dawn. The onion gravy went over white bread or biscuits, whatever was in the house, and it stretched that meal another day. In parts of Georgia and the Carolinas, smothered neck bones showed up on Sundays when the family could not afford a proper roast.
Molasses cornbread skillet came together in a rush of sweet aroma and sizzling iron, a lifesaver when time and money were short. The batter started with simple cornmeal and a spoonful of baking powder stirred into warm milk. Then dark molasses flowed in to lend a deep, earthy sweetness that turned every bite into comfort. A heavy cast iron pan was heated until nearly smoking, greased with whatever fat was on hand, and the batter poured in with a hiss that filled the room with the promise of quick nourishment. 10 minutes later, the edges pulled from the pan, the center set firm, and the top turned golden brown while the bottom formed a crust that crackled beneath a knife. Families sliced it thick, eating it plain when sugar was scarce or drizzling a little syrup if luck allowed. This skillet bread needed no fancy ingredients or long waiting, only a hot fire and steady hand, making it the kind of meal that fed weary workers before dawn or after a long day in the fields.
Number 19, fried green tomatoes. When the garden produced more tomatoes than a family could eat and frost was coming, mothers picked them green and sliced them thick. Each slice was dredged in cornmeal and fried in bacon grease until crispy on the outside and soft on the inside. The tartness of the green tomato cut through the richness of the grease, and the cornmeal crust shattered when you bit through it. A plate of fried green tomatoes with cornbread cost nothing because the tomatoes came from the yard and the cornmeal was already in the cupboard. Black families across Alabama, Mississippi, and the Carolinas ate this through late summer and early fall, 3 or 4 nights a week during tomato season. Nobody photographed it. Nobody wrote it down. The garden's tomatoes were not ripe, supper needed to happen, and the skillet was already hot. That was the whole decision.
Macaroni and cheese made from scratch with government cheese became the creamy casserole that turned welfare assistance into something families served with pride. Government commodity cheese, distributed through assistance programs, came in large blocks that creative mothers transformed into dishes that tasted better than store-bought. The cheese had unique texture and sharp flavor that melted beautifully when combined with evaporated milk, eggs, and elbow macaroni bought in bulk. Women layered the mixture in large baking dishes, topping it with extra cheese and sometimes breadcrumbs, then baked until golden and bubbling. The result was dense, creamy mac and cheese that could feed 20 people with just 2 boxes of pasta and 1 block of government cheese. Children loved it because the cheese pulled into strings with each serving. This wasn't bland, watery mac and cheese from boxes, but rich custard-like casserole that required skill to perfect. Black mothers took pride in their mac and cheese recipes.
Mayonnaise sandwiches were meals eaten in silence, when children knew better than to complain because nothing else filled the refrigerator. 2 slices of soft white bread with a thick smear of mayonnaise was dinner when the month outlasted the paycheck. There was no meat, no lettuce, no tomato, just bread and mayo, eaten at kitchen tables where mothers pretended not to notice disappointment. The sandwich was filling enough to quiet growling stomachs, and mayonnaise provided fat and calories that helped children sleep without hunger pains. Families never talked about these sandwiches outside the home because admitting to them meant admitting to poverty. Children grew up carrying the memory of that taste, soft bread giving way to creamy richness that was never quite enough, but always better than nothing.
Cowfoot soup was once considered a true stick-to-your-ribs dinner in African American kitchens, especially during lean years. Made by simmering cow feet slowly for hours, it produced a gelatin-rich broth that thickened naturally. Vegetables like carrots, onions, and potatoes were added to round it out, but the real heart of the dish was the deep, silky broth that clung to every spoonful. Families believed it gave strength and lasting fullness, which mattered when work was hard and meals were scarce. The dish required patience, since the feet had to cook down until tender, but the result was both nourishing and comforting. It carried a flavor unlike anything else, with a richness that no canned soup could match. Served with bread or rice, cowfoot soup fed whole families for pennies. Though it has largely disappeared from modern tables, it once represented resilience, thrift, and a belief in food's power to sustain more than just the body. Rabbit was one of the few meats you did not have to buy. You trapped it, you skinned it, you cooked it over a low flame and gave thanks for every bite. Stewed rabbit with wild onions was a meal of real effort. Catching the meat was half the battle, but cleaning it was even harder. Once in the pot, the meat softened slowly, and the onions, dug from fields or creek beds, gave it a sweet, peppery edge. Sometimes folks added vinegar or dried apples just to stretch the flavor. You could serve it over biscuits or eat it straight from the pot. This was food for people who made do with what they had and did not ask for more. It was quiet, filling, and honest. A dish that reminded you that hunger does not care about preferences. You ate to keep going. You ate because something had to. Homemade fish cakes were the ocean's gift to frugal kitchens and clever cooks. Canned salmon, mackerel, or even tuna became something special when mixed with breadcrumbs, minced onion, and egg. The mixture was formed into patties, pressed firm between flour-dusted palms, and dropped into hot oil where they hissed and crackled. The smell filled the kitchen with a salty promise, the kind that made you feel rich no matter what the bank said. Each patty fried to a perfect golden brown, crisp on the edges and soft inside. Served with a squeeze of lemon or a side of potatoes, they were a complete meal, cheap, filling, and full of pride. The secret was in the seasoning, often passed down from memory. A pinch of salt, a touch of mustard, maybe a shake of pepper. They were proof that good food came from care, not cost. Every bite was a reminder that a clever cook could make the simplest pantry taste like a banquet. Fried cabbage and potatoes was the smell of thrift and warmth rolled into one. The sizzle of sliced potatoes hitting the skillet mingled with the sound of cabbage crackling as it softened. It was a poor man's stir-fry, made with nothing fancy but full of flavor. Sometimes bacon grease or a strip of fatback turned the whole thing smoky, rich, and satisfying. The meal came together fast, just a handful of ingredients, but it fed everyone around the table. Children knew this dinner meant it was almost payday, when everything left in the pantry came together for one last meal. It was humble food, but every bite was seasoned with care. What made it special was not what it cost, but the way it could make a home feel full again, even when the shelves were bare. The pan clattered, the scent rose, and people gathered close without being called. The potatoes browned to perfection, The cabbage wilted into silk, and suddenly poverty felt far away. The laughter that filled the room tasted better than any feast. Fried cabbage and potatoes might not have been much to look at, but it carried dignity in every bite. It turned scraps into satisfaction and made sure no one went to bed hungry.
Franks and beans was a Tuesday night staple that nobody put on a menu but everybody ate. A package of frankfurters sliced on the diagonal, dropped into a pot of navy beans that had soaked overnight or come out of a can if the week was rough, seasoned with onion, ketchup, mustard, and enough black pepper to make it mean something. The whole thing bubbled together in one pot for 10 minutes while cornbread crisped in the skillet alongside. It wasn't restaurant food, it wasn't church food. It was Monday's paycheck stretched to cover Thursday's table, and in African-American urban households from Chicago's South Side to Harlem's tenements, this combination fed families through the 1950s and 60s without requiring a single apology. You ate it fast and you ate it quiet. Second helpings were not guaranteed. Nobody held the title of church egg maker by appointment. You earned it by producing deviled yolks that were smooth, not grainy, flavored with yellow mustard and sweet pickle relish, finished with paprika dusted on with a light hand. That paprika was not decoration. It was the signature, and anyone who used too much was noticed. Deviled eggs appeared at every church function from the 1930s forward, funerals, homecomings, baptism dinners, because they traveled well, needed no heat, and took under 10 minutes once the eggs were boiled. The unwritten law, you never took the platter home empty. 6 eggs boiled 12 minutes, rinsed cold, and yet the woman who made the best ones was known by name across 3 counties because everyone understood the recipe was only half of it. When the grocery money ran out 3 days before the check came, eggs and rice with tomato gravy kept the lights on inside the body. This was Depression-era arithmetic carried through generations of black kitchens. A dozen eggs for 30 cents in the 1940s, a cup of rice from a bulk sack, and a can of tomatoes that stretched across 2 meals. Rice cooked plain, eggs scrambled soft in a skillet with butter or bacon grease, pulled off the heat while still wet so they wouldn't turn rubbery. The tomato gravy came together in the same pan. Canned tomatoes crushed by hand, a little sugar to cut the acid, salt, and a spoonful of flour to thicken it. Everything went into one bowl. Eggs on rice, gravy over both. And for a few minutes, the kitchen smelled like someone was taking care of you, even if that someone was yourself. The old ones could tell by the color of the gravy whether it had been made with love or just made to get through.
Smothered cabbage with fatback was soul food that cooked in minutes, using a head of cabbage sliced thin and thrown into a pot with a small piece of fatback for flavor. Black mothers would let the fatback render its fat first, then add cabbage and water, covering the pot so everything steamed and wilted quickly. The cabbage softened into silky strands that absorbed smoky, salty richness from the pork fat, creating a side dish that tasted like it had simmered for hours, though it took less than 10 minutes. This dish appeared regularly in homes where fresh vegetables were plentiful, but meat was scarce, since a tiny piece of fatback could flavor an entire pot without costing much. Children ate their cabbage without complaint because mothers made it taste good enough to want seconds, and the fatback ensured they got needed calories and fat. A head of cabbage cost pennies, and fatback was one of the cheapest cuts available, making this meal both affordable and filling.
Number 17, fried bologna and biscuit sandwich. A round of red rind bologna on the butcher counter in 1944 Pittsburgh, 20 cents a pound. The War Ration Board rewrote the rules every other Tuesday. She cut 4 thick slices, scored each one with an X to keep it from puffing, laid them in a hot iron skillet with a teaspoon of bacon grease. The edges curled into little cups that held the grease. The centers turned the color of a warm brick. The biscuits were buttermilk, baked that morning in the same skillet. She split them, laid the fried slice on the bottom half, pressed the top down so the grease soaked through. A coal miner ate 2 for breakfast and a third in his lunch pail, wrapped in waxed paper. That was breakfast. The sandwich cost 5 cents in 1944. Your grandfather carried one like it into the coal seam every morning. It was the shift food of every miner from Pittsburgh to Beckley. The dish disappeared by 1980 when the bologna lost its red rind. Number 12, stewed pig feet. The part of the hog nobody else wanted became a supper that simmered all afternoon and fell off the bone. When a pig was butchered, the feet were among the lowliest scraps, mostly skin, bone, and connective tissue handed off cheap or for nothing at all. But Black Southern cooks understood that low and slow heat would turn that tough joint into something rich. They scrubbed the feet clean, split them, and dropped them into a pot of water with an onion, a few peppercorns, and a little vinegar to cut the heaviness. Then the pot simmered for 3 or 4 hours until the connective tissue broke down into a soft, gelatinous tenderness and the meat slid away from the bone. The broth thickened on its own from all that natural gelatin. Some folks ate them straight from the pot with a splash of hot sauce. Others pickled them in vinegar to keep on the counter as a snack. Served over rice with a piece of bread to sop the broth, this dish proved the patients could feed a family on what others discarded. Tender, sticky, and gone too soon from the table. Number 17, neck bones and egg noodles. Egg noodles were not something every family kept, but the ones who did swore by them. The noodles were wider and denser than spaghetti, and they held up better in a heavy pork broth without turning to mush. Families dropped them into the pot after the neck bones had simmered for 2 hours, and in 15 minutes, the noodles went soft and slippery, coated in rendered fat. The broth thickened from the starch and turned silky in a way that plain water and bones alone never could. In parts of Tennessee and Virginia, this was a cold weather meal that came out when the temperature dropped below freezing and the kitchen windows fogged up from the steam. Children ate the noodles first and went back for the bones, sucking the marrow out and stacking the clean bones on the edge of the plate like a small monument to what had been supper.
Molasses milk bread toast made the most of day-old loaves, turning scraps into a sweet, rich treat without wasting a crumb. Thick slices of slightly stale bread were dipped in a quick bath of warm milk to soften their edges, then fried in butter until golden and crisp. As the bread sizzled, its scent filled the kitchen, signaling a breakfast that felt indulgent despite its humble origins. A drizzle of deep, dark molasses added a caramel-like sweetness that soaked into every crevice, creating a dessert-like breakfast ready in minutes. Children often crowded around the stove waiting for their share, and adults cherished the comfort of something warm and sweet before a day of work. This recipe turned leftovers into a celebration, a reminder that resourcefulness could create moments of pleasure even in lean times. Molasses milk bread toast remains a testament to frugality and flavor, proof that yesterday's bread and a spoonful of syrup could still bring smiles to the morning table.
Number 23, rice and gravy. In the low country of South Carolina and the Creole kitchens of Louisiana, rice was not a side dish, it was the foundation. Leftover rice went back into the pot the next evening with a ladle of brown gravy saved from the night before. Gravy from smothered pork chops. Gravy from stewed chicken necks. Gravy from pan drippings collected in a jar by the stove. You heated it until the rice absorbed every drop and each grain was coated in something rich and dark. In the Gula communities of the Sea Islands, rice and gravy for supper was so traditional that not having it felt wrong. The rice was always there because no one in a Gula kitchen ever cooked less than a full pot. A 5-pound bag of rice cost 49 cents in 1955 and lasted 2 weeks. The gravy was free because it had already been paid for with yesterday's supper. Nothing wasted, nothing thrown away.
Chitlin dressing appeared on tables when traditional stuffing felt too expensive, turning what others discarded into something deeply satisfying. Cleaned thoroughly over hours, chitlins were chopped fine and mixed with cornbread crumbles, celery, onions, sage, and chicken broth stretched as far as possible. The mixture baked until golden on top while staying moist inside, creating dressing that carried intense flavor and connected families to ancestral cooking traditions. Black mothers prepared chitlins as acts of both economy and heritage, knowing their grandmothers had done the same during harder times. The smell was unmistakable, but for those raised with it, chitlin dressing meant Thanksgiving in ways plain bread stuffing never could. A single batch cost less than $3, yet fed the entire gathering. Young people might have initially resisted, but after that first bite, most came back for seconds. Chitlin dressing taught lessons about respecting traditions.
Vienna sausages were the emergency protein that lived in pantries waiting for the worst days. Those small cans of soft, pale sausages packed in broth cost almost nothing and required no cooking. Children ate them cold, straight from the can, or heated in a skillet with whatever else was available. The sausages were salty and soft, with a texture some children loved and others tolerated because there was no alternative. Mothers kept cans hidden for when everything else ran out. The sausages could be stretched into a meal with crackers or bread, providing enough protein to keep small bodies going. Vienna sausages appeared in school lunches and late-night suppers, always with the understanding that asking for something better was not an option. The metallic taste of those small sausages still brings back memories of lean times.
Fried carp with cornmeal crust was a dinner born from riverside living and community fish fries. Carp were plentiful in American rivers, and African-American families caught them regularly, especially in rural areas. The fish was cleaned, coated in cornmeal, and fried crisp until golden brown, creating a meal that was inexpensive yet full of flavor. Cornmeal gave it crunch, while frying in hot grease added richness that made even the bony carp appealing. Families gathered outdoors, frying pans sizzling as fish came out one after another to feed hungry crowds. It was both dinner and celebration, a reminder of how community shaped food traditions. While carp later lost popularity to fish like catfish, in the 1950s it was still common on many tables. The flavor of fried carp may be forgotten now, but it once represented both self-reliance and joy. Fried carp with cornmeal crust was more than just a cheap dinner. It was an event that tied families and neighbors together. This was not your average stew. Son of a Gun stew was a chuck wagon classic, made from every edible part of a calf: heart, liver, marrow, tongue, and sometimes even the brain if it had not gone to the dogs first. Cowboys did not waste a single bite, and the trail cook was expected to know how to turn those scraps into something halfway decent. The stew simmered in cast iron over open flame, thickened with flour or old coffee grounds, and flavored with salt if you were lucky enough to have it. A pot of Son of a Gun was more than food. It was a reminder that survival meant using everything you had, no matter how it looked or smelled going in. It filled you up, kept your strength, and tasted better than it had any right to after riding a horse all day. The name? That came from the fact that nobody ever wanted to admit what was actually in it. This was food for hard men under hard skies, and it stuck to your bones like nothing else. Potato soup with onions and milk was the meal that could fix almost anything. When the cupboards were nearly bare and payday was still far away, this humble soup stood like a quiet hero. A few potatoes, an onion, and a bit of milk were all it took to fill stomachs and calm worries. The smell of onions sizzling in butter or bacon grease drifted through the kitchen, wrapping the room in comfort. Potatoes were peeled and chopped, dropped into a bubbling pot of water, and left to soften until the broth turned cloudy and fragrant. A splash of milk turned it silky, while salt and pepper gave it life. Some added a spoonful of flour to thicken it. Others tossed in a scrap of leftover ham or a pat of butter for richness. It was simple, cheap, and perfect, made not to impress but to sustain. Grandparents called it poor man's cream soup, yet no one felt poor eating it. It was warm, filling, and tasted like kindness itself. Around the table, spoons clinked against bowls, laughter echoed between bites, and for a moment, the world outside felt manageable. Potato soup was more than food. It was faith in a pot, made from little but meaning everything. Fried hot dogs and rice were the clever man's version of sausage and grains, a dish born straight from necessity. One pack of hot dogs could stretch across 3 or 4 dinners if you sliced them right. Fried in a skillet until golden and crisp at the edges, the pieces were tossed into fluffy white rice seasoned with whatever was around: salt, pepper, maybe a touch of hot sauce. The sound of the skillet was quick and cheerful, the kind of noise that made a small kitchen feel like a celebration. It was cheap, filling, and came together in minutes after long workdays. Kids loved it because it looked fun, and parents loved it because it filled everyone without breaking the budget. Leftovers were rare because no one ever left a bite behind. It was proof that even the simplest food could still feel like comfort. Fried hot dogs and rice may not have been fancy, but in its sizzling, smoky way, it gave families a taste of joy on the hardest nights.
Salmon croquettes were the one supper she could throw together between walking in the door and the 6 o'clock news signing off. A can of pink salmon, bones mashed right in for calcium because nothing left that bowl, mixed with a beaten egg, crushed saltines, diced onion, and a spoonful of yellow mustard, then shaped into patties and laid into a skillet of hot oil that popped the moment they hit. The trick was the leftover cold mashed potato she sometimes folded in as the binder when crackers ran short. A Depression-era substitution that Black home cooks carried north through the Great Migration and never bothered to explain to anyone who didn't already know. She flipped them once, just once, and the side was always creamed English peas from a can, warmed in the same skillet after the croquettes came out. The whole thing was on the table in 12 minutes. You could follow every step exactly and still produce something that tasted almost right, but never quite right, because the missing ingredient wasn't in the recipe. It was in the hands that made it. She waited until the cracklings were still warm from rendering before working them into the cornmeal. That was the part that could not be faked or timed. Crackling cornmeal griddle cakes were a post-church morning tradition in households where nothing from the hog went to waste. The crisped pork skin pieces left after lard rendering went into the batter before they went limp. Each cake went onto a dry cast iron griddle. The cracklings brought their own fat to the pan. They came up dense, golden, and slightly smoky. Nothing like a store pancake, nothing like plain cornbread, but something in between that belonged entirely to these kitchens. The women who made them knew the ratio by feel. Too many cracklings and the cakes crumbled. Too few and they tasted like nothing. The cakes told the truth. The little can had a devil on the label, and the spread inside looked like nothing you served to company. But potted meat on crackers fed more solitary dinners than anyone will admit. Potted meat, a paste of mechanically separated chicken and beef trimmings packed into a 3-ounce can, cost less than a quarter in the 1960s. It spread onto saltines with a butter knife, the texture somewhere between pâté and surrender. The taste was salty, vaguely meaty, and oddly satisfying when you stopped expecting it to be something else. Seniors kept cans stacked in kitchen cabinets beside the Vienna sausages and sardines, the holy trinity of no-cook survival. This was the dinner you ate when you didn't tell your kids what you had. When they called and asked, you said you ate fine, and you did. You ate. Whether it was fine depended on what fine meant when the house was empty and the check was still a week away. Potted meat wasn't a meal anyone chose. It was a meal that chose you.
Hot water cornbread was the fastest bread Black mothers could make. requiring only cornmeal, boiling water, salt, and hot grease. The cornmeal was mixed with just boiled water until thick enough to shape, then mothers would wet their hands and form flat ovals, dropping them into sizzling oil where they puffed and browned in minutes. The result was bread with crispy shell and dense interior that soaked up pot liquor or gravy without falling apart. This was survival bread that appeared on weeknight tables when flour was gone and time was shorter than patience. Children grabbed pieces straight from paper towels, burning their fingers but unable to wait. Hot water cornbread cost almost nothing and filled stomachs quickly, essential for mothers who worked long shifts and still had families to feed at home. The sound of cornbread hitting hot oil meant supper was minutes away, a promise kept night after night.
Number 20, stewed turnip greens with pot liquor bread. A galvanized washtub of greens on the kitchen floor in 1946 Atlanta. 2 pecks pulled that morning from the back lot. She stripped the leaves from the stems with her thumbs, tore them into ribbons, dropped them into a cast iron pot with a smoked ham hock and a quart of water. The greens cooked down for 3 hours, dark as wet leather. The pot liquor ran the color of strong tea. The pot liquor was the prize. She tore corn pone into a tin bowl, ladled the green broth over it, called the children for supper. Each portion cost 4 cents. The doctor in 1956 told her the broth carried more iron than the steak he couldn't afford to recommend. Your grandmother already knew. She had been cooking it that way for decades. By 1989, the smoked ham hock was a specialty item, and the back lot where you grew the greens was a parking pad. Number 15, smothered chicken. A single tough old hen too tired to lay became a Sunday-worthy supper through the patience of smothering. This was not the crisp fried bird of the holidays. It was the everyday way to cook a cheap, stringy chicken until it surrendered. The cook browned the pieces in a heavy skillet, then deglazed the pan with a little broth or water, scraping up the dark browned bits that held all the flavor. Seasoning went in, the lid went on, and the whole thing simmered low until the meat pulled away from the bone and the liquid thickened into a deep brown gravy. A sliced onion melted into the sauce, sweetening it. By the end, one small bird had become a pot of tender meat swimming in gravy, enough to spoon over a mountain of rice and feed a full table. Served over rice or potatoes, it turned the toughest hen into comfort. Slow cooking made the cheapest chicken taste like a feast. Number 25, neck bones and okra. Okra grew wild in southern gardens every summer, shooting up so fast that a missed day of picking meant woody, tough pods. But young okra, sliced thin and dropped into a pot of neck bones that had been going since morning, did something no other vegetable could. It thickened the broth on its own. The natural mucilage turned the pot liquor heavy and silky without a pinch of flour. Families across Alabama and the Mississippi Delta cooked this from June straight through September, when okra came in faster than anyone could use it fresh. The bones gave the pot its depth. The okra gave it body. Some threw in a handful of garden tomatoes to cut the thickness. Others left it alone, ladled over rice in a wide bowl. It was not gumbo. It was older than gumbo, and it asked for less.
Catfish nuggets turned fresh or leftover fillets into a golden feast with lightning speed. Small chunks of fish were dredged in seasoned cornmeal, their surfaces coated with a thin layer that crisped beautifully in hot oil. As the nuggets fried, the kitchen filled with the scent of the river and the satisfying crackle of fish hitting iron. Within minutes, each piece emerged with a crunchy crust and tender, flaky interior that needed little more than a squeeze of lemon or a dash of pepper. Families along southern waterways loved this recipe for its quick turnaround and ability to make a small catch stretch into a full meal. Children often grabbed the first pieces straight from the skillet, unable to wait for plates. Whether served with grits, tucked into bread, or eaten plain, These nuggets proved that fresh fish and a hot pan were all it took to bring a taste of abundance to even the humblest table. Catfish nuggets captured the essence of riverside living in every bite. Chicken quarters baked instead of turkey gave families affordable poultry that still felt special, allowing Black mothers to serve bird on Thanksgiving without spending $20 on turkey. Leg quarters sold for less than 50 cents per pound in the 1970s, and when bought in bulk bags, they became even more economical. Mothers seasoned them heavily with paprika, garlic powder, black pepper, and whatever herbs the cabinet held, then baked them slowly until the skin crisped golden and the meat stayed tender. The dark meat remained moist even with extended cooking, making them more forgiving than turkey breast. A 10-pound bag of chicken quarters could feed 20 people when accompanied by generous sides. The drippings collected in baking pans became bases for gravy, ensuring nothing went to waste. Children actually preferred chicken to turkey because it was familiar and easier to eat. Baked chicken quarters taught families that tradition could be adapted.
Oatmeal for dinner was the meal no one talked about outside the house because breakfast food at supper time meant things had gotten desperate. Mothers cooked a large pot of oats, sometimes sweetened with sugar, sometimes salted and served plain, stretching a box that cost pennies into a meal that filled every belly at the table. The oatmeal was thick and warm, sticking to ribs and helping children sleep without hunger waking them. There was no shame inside the kitchen, only practicality and quiet understanding that food was food regardless of when it appeared. Children ate their bowls without complaint, knowing better than to ask for something else. Oatmeal for dinner meant the pantry was nearly bare but not empty. It meant survival was still possible. The taste of plain oats still carries that memory for those who lived it.
Prairie chicken was not chicken at all. It was wild grouse or quail, lean and gamey, and harder to catch than it was to cook. These birds were everywhere across the plains in the early days, and they fed whole families with just one shot and a lucky morning. The dressing, what we would now call stuffing, was made with old bread, sage, and whatever herbs you could find or grow in the yard. When it was baked in a cast-iron Dutch oven, the whole cabin would fill with the kind of scent that stopped everyone in their tracks. This meal showed up on tables for Sunday dinner or after a good hunting day. It reminded folks of home, even if that home was just four walls and a dirt floor. Cabbage rolls with ground beef and rice were a triumph of patience, skill, and unshakable hope. One head of cabbage, softened in boiling water, became the vessel for a hearty mix of rice, meat, onions, and spice. Each leaf was filled carefully, folded tight like a promise, and laid in neat rows inside a pot. Tomato sauce was poured over the top, bubbling slowly until everything came together in harmony. The scent alone could feed a soul before the first bite even touched a plate. Every roll told a story of care. A mother's hands working late into the evening, her eyes soft with purpose. The rolls were tender, flavorful, and filling, feeding large families on little more than a pound of meat. Eaten with bread to soak up the sauce, it was a dinner that made the ordinary feel special. Cabbage rolls were patience served hot, a lesson that time and love could make even the simplest food unforgettable. Sweet potatoes and white bread supper was simple, sweet, and sacred in its own way. When sugar was scarce, this pairing filled the gap between dinner and dessert. Sweet potatoes were roasted or boiled until soft and mashed, then spread across slices of white bread still warm from the toaster. Sometimes a bit of butter or syrup was added, if luck or paychecks allowed. The flavor was rich but humble, sweet enough to satisfy and hearty enough to last through the night. It was the kind of meal that carried memories of holidays and home, even on the hardest days. Families sat around small tables, sharing what little they had, and somehow it always felt like plenty. It was a quiet joy, born from making sweetness out of struggle, a reminder that love could turn even two simple foods into comfort. The smell of roasted sweet potatoes would drift through the house, thick and warm like a promise. Some ate it slowly, savoring every bite, while others devoured it like it was cake. There was no shame in it, just satisfaction. That humble meal was more than food. It was proof that something as ordinary as a potato and bread could taste like care, and sometimes that was enough to keep hope alive.
Here are 60 cheap African-American 10-minute dinners for seniors living alone. Every one of these meals was built on the same idea: feed yourself well, spend almost nothing, and never be in that kitchen longer than you have to. A can of something, a skillet, in 10 minutes. That has been a full dinner for a long time, and it still is. If one of these brought back a memory or reminded you of something your family used to make, put it in the comments. Share this video with someone who still cooks like this, and if you are not subscribed yet, hit subscribe so you do not miss the next one.